Welcome to the Ask Ezra Intimacy Coaching Podcast, a peek behind the curtain of some of the most intimate conversations that people have with Ezra as an intimacy coach. Join us for a session already in progress.
Welcome, Mike Brown, to the Ask Ezra podcast.
Man, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me, you've got a podcast, right? The Art of Letting Go.
Yes, I started the Art of Letting Go in 2017 as really like a therapy alternate. It was too expensive for me at the time, and I needed a place to still express myself and just work through feelings, and podcasting became that way for me.
Awesome. And so is it just you talking? Do you have guests? Do you bring on experts? What do you do?
Yeah, so I do the majority of the talking, but I do have guests come on and share their journeys. Like I said, in the beginning, it was a lot of like releasing and working through things. And in the past year or so, it's been a lot of inspiration just of, my journey of quitting my job, leaving my apartment, and talking to people that are on those same types of journeys as well. So like people that are just figuring out life and sharing our life experiences.
Yeah, I love that. And I love, the art of letting go. I think is such a lovely concept. This idea that, letting go is a skill.
Yeah,
And
it is. And I don't think it ever stops. I think at every stage of the journey, there is something that another layer that we'll have to shed to get to the next place. So, yeah, I feel like it's continuous as long as we're alive.
yeah, I really like the analogy of baggage, right?
Yeah,
Like we're carrying these things with us, and if we can unpack them, they might get lighter, or we can even just set it down and walk without it, and then we just can be lighter in the world. We can move easier.
yeah.
So what is the secret? What's the key?
The secret to letting go is probably just to submit to life. Rather than, I think you can't fight the inevitable. So sometimes just giving in to what life has in store for you is the simplest way to let go.
Is that what I've been doing wrong? Well, and I think it's funny too, because I come from a space where submission has kind of a double meaning, right?
Yeah.
I come from the BDSM space where we have dominance and submission, and it's like, who in the relationship wants to be making choices, right?
Yeah.
So the submissive person is like, I don't want to make choices. I'm here. You do what you want to do. These are the 10 things I like to do. You go ahead. And
Yeah.
I'm usually the other person who has like, I have like a whole screenplay written out. Like, all right, we're gonna do this, 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 and this, and this, and then that. And if we have time, we're gonna do that. And so, but traditionally, submission has been hard for me in that sexual space, right? Like letting go of expectation, letting go of control. But I think it's really attractive, and I think that there's some parallels too. Like I can practice letting go in that space, and that's going to make it easier for me to let go to life, to a higher power, to circumstance, to whatever, right?
Yeah.
Practice.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that, like the dominant submissive, because I think for me in relationships, I really feel that balance of both. Like in letting go, yes, submitting to life, but in relationships, sometimes there are spaces where I feel the need to be dominant, and then some where I feel opportunities to be submissive as well.
Yeah, and I think it's always a balance. Even, somebody who, like me, I traditionally am like really the one in charge in relationships, but it's still a balance. We still need to negotiate together. There's still times that I just want to sit back and get my feet rubbed, right? Like, what am I going to say? Like, do the big toe now. All right, now the harder. Now this, like, that's exhausting. I'm fucking tired of it. And
Right.
I think there are some people who are locked in that rigidity, and I think I was locked in a much stronger rigidity at one point, and I think that's where they need to be at that time. But boy, is that exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I always, my joke is like, when you're obsessed with control, you really ought to remember that you're stuck on the surface of a gigantic dirt clot that's moving like 1,000,000 miles an hour through space, right? Like, how much control do you really have?
That's true.
Awesome.
That's funny.
I was half expecting, Mike, you to say, like, I have therapists come on my show and I make them give me therapy.
I have therapists. It's actually the opposite. I have therapists come on my show and I give them therapy.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Yeah, like a lot of times I think because therapists are listening to other people's stories so much that when it comes time to share their story and for them to open up, I'm able to ask them questions that people may not normally ask them in their daily lives.
Yeah, that's so important. Coaches need coaches, therapists need
Yeah,
therapists, gurus need gurus.
I think during the pandemic was when I learned that we were all human, because I think I did hold certain people in such high regards, like therapists and this and that. And it's like everybody was literally trying to figure this shit out. So it was nice to connect with people on a human level and then to just show their vulnerability of like, I don't know it all. I don't have it all together, but I can support you in your journey of figuring it out. And I think that's what we're all here for, to help each other just figure this out.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an interesting question. Why are we here? That's a whole other episode.
Yeah, yeah.
So, okay, that sounds really interesting, and I'm going to pressure you to let me be on your show because I need therapy too. So,
Okay, let's do it. Let's do
yeah.
it.
Um, and you make music too, right?
I do. I just released some music Wednesday. Actually, before I started podcasting, I was producing music for artists, and I've always written my own music, but always was afraid to share it with people. And this is probably one of the first times I'm feeling confident enough and feeling good about what I'm doing to share it with the world. And the response is, and like I said, I only put it out Wednesday, but the response has been really well. And it's really just me giving myself back those tools to keep me going. Like a lot of it is like just inspirational rap, kind of just trying to motivate myself and, in hopes of it doing the same for other people as well.
So how can people hear the music? What do you go by?
So I go by Mike Brown. I chose to just go by Mike Brown on everything because when I was younger, I used to have like a producer name or a rapper name, and it just felt like too much to manage too many people in this one body. So I just chose to just go with Mike Brown and just be that across the board. The project is called Desert Thoughts. I wrote most of it in Joshua Tree and in Arizona, just a couple of places I was traveling on my trip. And yeah, it is on all the streaming services. So there's two versions. There's one that's on like the Spotify's and Apple's, but then there's a SoundCloud version that really has the demos of the songs that I was working on and the ideas I was working on. So if people want to feel the raw versions of some of those songs, like they're available there.
Awesome. Fantastic.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful. I do some poetry myself, and
Oh, nice.
yeah, in fact, I mean, I hate to plug myself while I'm interviewing you, but it's
Nah,
about
go
to
for
happen.
it.
So, I actually I've just released a book with, I wrote it. It was poetry that I wrote to match my mother's fine art painting.
Wow.
Yeah. And what I realized is that because my mother didn't like address her trauma before having children, it was mostly passed on, right? And that
Yeah.
later she sort of got these resources to start processing this trauma, and that in certain ways we've like caught up with each other in processing a similar trauma because it was kind of passed on. It's not the exact same. I got something from my dad too, and then life experience adds on to everything. But I realized that she was using the imagery of her artwork to process those different stages of grief that she was going through. So so we found paintings that sort of match the Kubler-Ross model of grief, and then I just wrote poetry to go along with it, and that's called The Path Through. So that's pretty
Wow.
cool. Yeah.
That sounds really cool. That sounds really cool.
Let me tell you, it's a trip working with my mother. It was
Yeah, I'm sure it was pretty healing though. I'm sure it was.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's something about getting it down on paper, right? There's something
Yeah,
about being seen, I think, is a really significant part of healing. And
yeah,
so you put it on the page so it can die on the page, and then I can go and live on without it, right?
yeah. Man, that's beautiful. I appreciate you sharing that because yeah, everything that we create is not always pretty. Sometimes it can be, pretty raw.
This is the edit copy. This is larger than it's going to be. But guess what? If you're not on my Patreon, you can't see what I'm talking about. It's just $5, guys. Okay, you can see anyway,
I
or buy
like
the
that.
book, whatever. But yeah, okay. So enough about me. So I want to know, Mike. I want to know about your intimate life. If you're interested in sharing, I'd love to hear. What's going on with you.
Um, I will say at this stage in my life, this is probably the most healthiest space I've been in connection to intimacy. And I think it's because I've learned how to become a better communicator of my needs and also just feeling like I have autonomy over my body.
Mm-hmm. And what do you feel like was the most important skill in that? You said you developed this ability to communicate. So what would you say was maybe the most important skill in that skill set?
Um, I think most important skill set I would probably say is just finding the safety within. I think a lot of times I've been very much so a people pleaser. So I've kind of matched other people's levels of intimacy. And when I was younger, because because I wasn't open about my sexuality, I had to learn intimacy through darkness. So connecting with people that um maybe only equated sex to intimacy, and then even sex being a form of coping uh, was my exposure to intimacy in a sense. And I think through my journey of learning and experience, I started to understand sometimes intimacy could be as simple as a conversation or physical touch. Like it doesn't just have to be full on sex every time. And like I said, sex that is encouraged as a tool as opposed to like really connecting with the person that is in front of you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think sex can have zero intimacy, right?
Yeah,
And it's so challenging that so often we think of the word intimacy to mean sex.
right, right.
So it can be
Yeah,
very confusing.
and I think I was there when I was younger, and as I learned, like I said, in my journey of understanding, it was like, oh wow, like this is like the surface of surface levels when it comes to intimacy. Like, you know, like I said, sometimes just being able to share my feelings with somebody feels so like intimate. And to have the space to do that, I think for me, especially in my life right now, like being able to give people space to be their full selves and showing up and being my full self, because it doesn't look the same every time. So
Yeah, how
that
could it?
exactly. But some people expect that. Some people expect you to be a certain way all the time. And yeah, it's been a journey for me with intimacy.
So, Mike, you're telling me you're not a sex robot.
No, no. Not at all. And it's funny because like I think people expect that through just watching porn and stuff like that. Like people expect you to just perform. And I don't like the performance of it. I really don't. I enjoy connecting with my partner um physically, romantically, but to like have to go back to back to back to back to back, it's like that's insane. Or just like just multiple people. That's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like personally, I do actually enjoy performance, but
Yeah.
it can be a trap too. Like if you feel stuck in performance, like when that time comes to like really connect and you're, too busy doing the show, right? Then you miss that opportunity to connect, right?
And I think that's the thing. Like I agree. I think you can perform. I think you can be intimate, but I think you have to know the difference between the two. And I think a lot of times people don't know the difference between connecting and performing.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned feeling the safety within. I'd be really curious to know what brought you that sense of safety, Mike.
Um, I would say being in uncomfortable sexual situations, being in situations that may have not felt the best to me, but just kind of going with it because it may have been the norm of my experiences, or I may have been too scared to say that I wasn't interested or I didn't want this, and kind of just allowing things to happen. Um, and I felt like, yeah, I will say in 2018, if I'm just, and this is a show about intimacy and being vulnerable and stuff. So I was taking advantage of 2018. Yeah, 2018. No, yeah, 2018. And it made it hard for me to just trust people for a little while because I was drunk. Um and it was someone that I trusted. So for myself, I just had to really find some clarity in just being very honest and upfront about what I want, don't want, and speaking up for myself and not being afraid of what the result of that looks like.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
And I think it's so interesting too. I mean, it's not the thing that makes us traumatized, it's the position we're in, right? And so you
for
talked
sure.
about this like really hard situation that you were in, and that actually catalyzed that growth and learning.
It did. It did. Cause I'll be honest with you, I didn't remember much from it, but I did have flashes of just like more so being in shock in my head that it was happening in real time. Um and just looking back on that, one, I wouldn't have let myself drink that much. Two, um, yeah, I just don't think if I were to relive that again, I think I would have spoken up for myself if I could have. But yeah, it made me find it within myself just to really say like, nah, this is not gonna happen again,
Hmm.
and just really, really speak up for myself. Like if something feels uncomfortable, saying it's uncomfortable. If something doesn't feel right, like speaking up for it. And that's something I feel like people teach kids, but as adults somehow we forget.
Yeah, well, I think it's something we're supposed to teach kids, and unfortunately, sometimes we give them lip service, and
Yeah,
then when they don't want to do something, we say, "Who cares what you want?" Right?
yeah,
Or, yeah, there's so many ways that we set children up for um, being taken advantage of, unfortunately.
yeah. And again, kind of going back to, you know, the people pleasing of like just wanting to look a certain way for people or wanting people to not see you in a bad light. Like, yeah, we have to cut that out as well.
Yeah. No, I see that so often. People pleasing is a really common challenge. And I think one of the things that makes it harder to deal with is the feeling like you're doing someone else a service, right? And if they really care about you, then you're not doing them a service. You're doing them a disservice.
For sure. For sure. I mean, I think, just kind of thinking now, and it's funny, I haven't really talked about much of this stuff in years, so it's interesting to like reflect on it right now. And by the way, I did go to therapy after this. This wasn't like a podcast working out. Like, this is like real life. Let me go to therapy and work on this and heal myself. But yeah, I think I used to sometimes worry about, oh, this person may not like me if I say no. And it's like, but why would you want to be with somebody that doesn't like you for saying no?
Mm,
I had to really find some self-value as well. Like, I think the whole journey of like coming out and just the whole sexuality journey in general makes it hard for people to really value themselves and see themselves. So you kind of, at least for me, I can't speak for everyone, but for me, it made me settle for a lot of things because it's like, well, this person kind of values me more than what I valued myself at because of this. So maybe I should just go with this, but nah.
I hear you. That's often that happens a lot too. If you don't value your own time, if somebody comes along and values it a little bit, it feels like a boon, but really that person is not the greatest for you.
Yeah, I've been there and done that, and I do not want to go back.
Yeah. You you mentioned coming out. What did you come out as?
Uh, Initially I identified as gay. Um, and I would say now I identify as queer. Gay has always felt like I've always seen the word negative in my life, not even in relation to sexuality, but even just growing up as a kid, people just use the word gay so much.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hard for me to accept being gay because it's like I've only known this word to mean something negative. So if I accept this word, now I'm putting this negativity on me. And I tried to make it as positive as I possibly could. But, being in um the gay community a lot of times, it was really just sex driven in my experiences. I don't want to just turn people off from the entire community or anything like that. Like, in my experiences, it was a lot of sex driven community. And when I started to pull back on being so in the scene, I still was me. I still was Mike. I moved in the world. People still saw me as my full self. I never hid my sexuality post inviting people into who I am. So it's like, if I'm able to move in the world, have a partner and be in the world and do all these things, and people value me at more than my sex, like maybe I'm more than that. And I think I tried just figuring out language that speaks to me and who I am. And queer really spoke to me, um, because queer just felt like not even a sexual preference, but just like being a little left of center, like just being a little different. And even in sexual identity, I have a friend who introduced me to the term same gender loving. And that speaks to me a lot because I am not only physically attracted to men, but when I am in partnership or romantic relationship, I do love them. It's not just about having sex with them. I do love them. And you know, I guess that, like, both of those really speak to me.
Sure, yeah, I love the term queer because there's no entrance exam,
Yeah,
right? I think sometimes people get, especially with this sort of bi or gay kind of where's the line, and people get pushed one way or the other, and that can be really challenging. And I love queer because it's not intricately descriptive. right? It's not. Nobody's ever said, well, are you queer enough to be queer, right?
Yeah,
Not to me, at least. So,
yeah, yeah. I've never had. I actually have had people ask me why I choose to identify as queer, and honestly, it has only been like these like the masculine bear type person that just, you know, they want everybody to be gay and identify as gay and be proud of being gay. And it's like, that's great, but like, respect me for what I choose to identify as, and I respect you for what I choose to identify as well.
sure, sure. So now I'm gonna get all kinds of comments from angry bears, right?
Possibly.
Tell me why Mike's wrong in the comments.
Right. I know him. No.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I love this. You mentioned like more autonomy.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about that?
Um, for me, it was really just taking ownership of my body. Like I said, I didn't always know how to say no. I didn't always know how to not take on something that I didn't want to. And in really owning this body, I didn't care who felt any kind of way about what I felt. Like if I felt uncomfortable, if I felt disrespected and I spoke up on it, I didn't care what the result would be because this is my life.
Yeah, nobody else is gonna live it for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and made me feel more in control and like really being in control of my body. Um yeah, it felt powerful to initially feel. I mean, now I don't really even give it thought. It's easy to not give it thought because I've been living it in practice for a while now. But I think initially, yeah, I just felt so like powerful, feeling like I control this body. And it's like, yeah, you've been in control of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that's when you don't give it up to other people, right? Like you default
Yeah,
have control of your body, and
yeah,
then people give us messages that, people won't like you unless you do this. You won't fit in unless you do this, right? And then if you buy into it, then that's when you give up control.
yeah.
Are you partnered, Mike?
I am, I am.
Okay,
And it's been a year. It's been like a year now, and it's been going really well.
glad to hear it. And would you say that it is ideal?
It is honestly. This feels like the most healthy connection that I've had with another person, just because it's not built on ownership. I think a lot of times when we are dating people or getting to know people, even in like family and friendships, like we feel ownership to these people, and I don't feel that. I feel very connected in almost in the way of a friend, but there's that extra component of being romantic. Like I really want the best for this person. And that's the best whether it's with me or without me. You know what I mean?
How novel, Mike, that we have lovers that are also friends.
And honestly, I feel like in the past it's always been the other way around for me. It's usually been, okay, you're my partner, now I want to be your friend. And sometimes that's too late.
Mm-hmm.
So like
Yeah.
in really getting to know someone and building friendship and then being able to determine like, oh wow, like I really like this person. Like, we took a 2-month road trip together, didn't have like no arguments, and more so because we don't communicate in that way. But also like a lot of my stuff that would come up for me had nothing to do with him. It always was something from me. It was always like, okay, I'm a little annoyed from traveling all day or whatever it is. It usually was something that was either my own stuff or his own stuff. It never was just us going back and forth about anything.
Well, I think that's usually how it is. It's usually one person having a hard time and then the other person just stepping in it.
True, but I think sometimes, and I would say the majority of people are not that self-aware to
Uh-huh.
recognize that. So like a lot of times it's you did this, you, without looking at like, oh, what did I do?
Right.
You know?
Right. I remember I had a partner who took issue with how angry I got with video games. Like, what? Like, what does this have anything to do with you?
That's funny.
Right? And it's so obviously not about them.
Yeah.
And yet still, they stepped in it.
Yeah.
So I'm sure I've stepped in it lots and lots of times. I don't mean to point the finger, but
And and we all do. That's the thing. We all do. But I think through conversation you're able to resolve that. Like I think sometimes because I can be somebody that can be a little snappy sometimes, and then when I check myself, I'm able to communicate to you like, hey, I was like this because I was feeling this. I
mhm.
apologize.
Yeah,
You
you're
know,
taking ownership.
exactly that. I think that's the biggest key to success in partnership is just taking ownership for your shit.
Yeah. I think one of the in the spirit of taking ownership, one of the things that is really tough for me is rejection sensitivity, right?
Mm,
So and I've sort of like self-diagnosed rejection sensitive dysphoria, right? Which is like it's worse than just getting rejected. It's like sometimes you make up feeling rejected when it's not appropriate. Sometimes when there is a rejection, like you make it into a bigger thing. Um, and there are so many instances in my past where there was a reason why something wasn't working. And then I sort of jumped into the script of, oh, it's because I didn't do enough, or I didn't do it right,
mm,
or, I'm not this enough, I'm not that enough, right? They don't, why won't they love me?
yeah, I understand, and I used to go through that as well. And I think a tool that has helped me, and that is just saying things out loud,
Mm,
like really just like hearing myself say whatever that thought is out loud. And sometimes I'll be like, why would you think that? Like, why would that even cross your mind? And I have to check in with myself of like, well, why am I thinking like this? Because yeah, sometimes that negative voice can be really loud.
yeah, yeah. I like the bombastic antithesis, right?
What is that?
So when I have a negative story or a negative belief, or I call them limiting stories or limiting beliefs, um, I will say, okay, well, that is how I have been talking to myself. And I'll weigh the consequences. I'll say, well, this is what it cost me, and this is how, this is what it does for me. If it doesn't measure up, it's limiting. Okay, it did not pass the test. It's time to go. So I might say, one thing I would say to protect myself from rejection is I would talk myself out of talking to attractive people by saying I'm not that attractive,
Oh
right?
wow.
Right. I'm not that cute. I can't just walk up to people and talk to them, which is bullshit because I have and it's worked, right? So the bombastic antithesis is to take that negative one of like you're not attractive and combat it with a positive 10, right? So when I hear myself say you're not that attractive, I say actually I'm hot shit and people want me.
I like that.
Yeah, just way over the top.
Yeah.
Right. And then I think you kind of have two other options, right? There's like the modest antithesis is to say I am attractive, right? I see that negative one and I combat it with a positive one. And
Yeah.
the other is like divide by zero. I don't know how attractive that person is. I call that the logical antithesis, right? I don't know how attractive that person finds me. Until I talk to them, I don't know,
That's true.
right?
Yeah.
But I like the bombastic one because I'm over the top.
I like that too. I'm gonna have to start trying it.
Well, I think that's lovely that you've got a situation that feels ideal. And I think it's so very uncommon. And I want to point out, this autonomy, this self-awareness, this taking responsibility. I think all those things are contributing to your ability to maintain this partnership in an ideal way.
I appreciate that, and I feel the same. And I would definitely say like it hasn't always been like this. I think experience over time has gotten me to this place.
I will say that there's only 2 episodes I've ever had where people are like, yeah, no, actually things are fantastic. And they've both been men who love men. So maybe there's a pattern, maybe there isn't. I don't know.
It's possible.
2 is a small sample size. So if you're also a man who loves men who wants to get on the show and make it 3, then we can actually have some statistical significance.
That's funny. And I guess for all the listeners, like, try dating men.
There you go. Yeah. I don't think that the women in the audience will be very happy with that suggestion. Yes,
Oh, man.
fantastic. So yeah, well, I mean, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Let me know again, how can people get a hold of you? How can people hear your podcast or your music?
Yes, so the podcast is The Art of Letting Go. It's on all streaming services, along with my music, under Mike Brown. The project is called Desert Thoughts. But you can get in touch with me on all social media at The Art of Letting Go podcast or just Mike Brown. The website is www.theartoflettinggopodcast.com. I would love to connect with more people, have more conversations. I really enjoyed this today. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming on.
Of course. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the Ask Ezra Intimacy Coaching Podcast. Support our show at patreon.com/AskEzra. Join us at the personal growth tier and receive a special thank you on the next podcast episode. A very special thank you to both Sarah Nash and Deb Matson for being Patreon supporters at the personal growth tier and helping make the Ask Ezra Intimacy Coaching Podcast possible.